Anyways, welcome everyone to our panel. My name is Hank Thomas. I'm from Washington, D.C., live in Washington, D.C. I'm the CEO of a venture capital firm called Strategic Cyber Ventures that I started about 6 years ago. SCV, Strategic Cyber Ventures, initially started off investing primarily in early stage cybersecurity technology. We've since evolved to invest in some other forms of security technology outside of just traditional cybersecurity, and more recently in some blockchain technology, Bitcoin, and privacy technology. So we've kind of diversified our aperture a bit. I'm a member of the advisory board for the Consumer Electronics Show, and I help them find speakers and pull together content mostly around security for the show. So thank you all for joining me today. We kind of thought we were going to be up here on the stage with no one in the crowd, and it's great to see a packed room. This is amazing. And the interest in cybersecurity. So joining me today, I have Missy Gillette from Booz Allen Hamilton, which I'm an alum of as well. I worked there for 11 years. Thanks for joining us, Missy. Paul Eisler from US Telecom, also a Washingtonian. And Dr. Derek Peterson from Boingo. I was going to say Boingo Wireless, but I'm not supposed to say the wireless part anymore, right? I'm just supposed to.
Yeah, you can say both.
I can say Boingo Wireless, okay. So I'll have them talk a little bit about what they do at their respective organizations, and we'll kick it off with some questions. So Missy, tell us about your life at Booz Allen.
Yeah, absolutely. So welcome. Great to be here. Appreciate again, and reiterating what Hank mentioned, everyone being here. So this is great. So Missy Gillette, I work at Booz Allen Hamilton. I lead up and head up their cybersecurity, risk assessment, and supply chain cybersecurity practice. So focused on innovating solutions for both the federal and commercial space and clients that we serve, as well as delivering those solutions effectively. Prior to Booz Allen, I remained in information security and cybersecurity, primarily for large financial services, and then had a short stint at a few different startups focused again on risk management, third-party risk management. So excited to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Eisler. I'm from the US Telecom, the Broadband Association. This year we're celebrating 125 years as representatives of the communications industry in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that you reflect on, which to my knowledge, and I hope I can say this, I think we're the oldest trade association in D.C., yet we're constantly at the leading edge of the newest innovations, not only in communications technology, but also in the broader ICT sector. I mean, you look at some of our biggest companies like AT&T and Verizon, they're basically software companies at this point. So what I do over there is I kind of wear two hats. I'm an attorney and I work closely with our policy and our legal teams, but I also wear my cybersecurity hat, and that's kind of what I'm going to be emphasizing here today, where we work in the development of highly influential white papers that lead to the development of standards, and we do this in partnership with 15 global companies, as well as the hosts of CES, which we're very grateful for providing this opportunity, which is CTA. They're our partners in this effort. It's called the Council to Secure the Digital Economy. I'm really excited to be here.
All right, so I'm Derek Peterson. I'm a technologist, so I'm the CTO, CIO, CSO, or anything that touches technology at Boingo. I've been there about 10 years now. A lot of people know Boingo for the airport service that we used to offer. Obviously, we've changed. I got there in 2011. We now do indoor cellular connections for all the carriers. We do towers, we do military bases, and we've kind of switched from just being able to provide networks for commercial use, but also providing it for everybody, so more B2B kind of approaches. I get to have the fun of making sure that we build them correctly for everybody, and that means, all the security and all the issues that come with it for all the different people inside of an airport or inside of a stadium or inside of a military base. So a lot of fun, and I have a great team behind me to help me make it happen. So happy to be here, and I'm also on the CES Technology Council and part of that group too, to try to help steer that.
So as you can see, we got an esteemed group of experts here that have been living the cybersecurity beyond the office reality since March of 2019, and thank you all for joining me today and for being a part of this. At the end, we'll save some time for some questions from the audience, or possibly from the metaverse. We'll see if that's possible. I'm not sure, but definitely from the audience. And we thought it'd be interesting to have a conversation around the you know, everyone had the reality of March of 2019 of kind of like, I know I did, one day everyone was just sort of like running out of the office like Godzilla was coming, and then we never went back. You know, I went back a couple weeks later to clean some things up, and it was like, you know, Chernobyl. You know, there were things still like in the exact same spot, and like coffee cups sitting there, and it was very weird. But as security professionals, I think we all were in different roles, whether it's more on the legal side or the consulting side or delivering for military bases and things like that, airports. The new reality, I guess I hate that term, but the fact that, you know, employees were out in the world using personal devices on networks in foreign countries to do sensitive things for their businesses, and some organizations were prepared for this and others weren't. So we really want to get to the bottom of today of talking about what good looks like, what bad looks like, and maybe also talk a little bit about what are some realistic things that people can do on their own that don't require a subject matter expert to kind of become more secure, because I think people are always kind of looking for those things. So Missy, we'll start off with you. You know, Booz Allen has a commercial practice and a federal, kind of famous for its federal practice, but also has a large commercial practice, which you primarily work in. What are some of the things you're seeing your customers do well as they transition since March of 2019 till now, focusing on the well? Like, what are people doing out there that's making this new world a more secure place in a positive way?
Sure. And this one took some thought, to be honest. So it is interesting to say that we are still in a transition. I look at this as this is the reality. This is where we're at. We're all digitally operating at this point in time. So our goal now is to how do we focus and integrate cybersecurity in our day-to-day lives, whether that's at an organizational level or at a personal level. Organizationally, I look at it in two ways around where organizations did well over the last couple of years. One is the operational risk that they basically inherited day one when everyone went remotely. And then the second piece is the cybersecurity risk. Operationally, there are three main buckets that I like to evaluate risk at. The first is around people. How did they respond in terms of people? How do companies and clients respond in terms of technology operationally? And then lastly, process. Companies that did really well, they put their people first. They thankfully had a lot of the infrastructure already in place, but they were able to quickly prioritize and expand that infrastructure in a very quick and efficient way. The ones that did really well were the ones that really dedicated SWAT teams to expand this. And so to Hank's point around going into the office and it felt like Chernobyl, we all felt that in some way, shape, or form, because rarely were organizations primarily remote in the way that we are today. So companies that did really well were able to put their people first, expand their infrastructure in a quick and efficient way, and also add in soft touches in terms of people first. One of the things that really worked well were providing focus and prioritization around making sure people had what they needed in order to do their job. We had to really spend the first quarter working with companies to give confidence in their workforce that they can do their job and we're going to get through this together, and that technology needs to be an enabler. With that said, when technology is an enabler, that's going to introduce different types of cybersecurity risk. So that goes to my second group. You know, operationally risk perspective, it's focused on people, giving them what they need to do their job. It's ensuring that they have the technology and infrastructure to collaborate effectively and do their job. And then it's ensuring that you have the process in place to create and be able to support this new way of work. Cybersecurity-wise, from a people perspective, training. The ones that did really well were the folks that really put security top of mind, not once a year in the mandatory cybersecurity training, which most people hate taking, but really making sure that people understood what they needed to look for in terms of this new way we were working, and if they see something, say something. To complement that is the process piece. What processes were put in place to ensure that if they did see something, where do they report it? How do they manage it? What do they need to look for? Who do they reach out to? And kind of keeping that continuous update of information pushed to the organization and the employees. And then lastly is around technology. We have remote infrastructure scaling at mass speeds, quickly, efficiently, but that creates vulnerabilities. Anything with an application, anything with a system has vulnerabilities, it has weaknesses, it needs to be continuously monitored. Your attack surface just completely expanded. The vectors completely expanded. It increased substantially. So how did the companies that did well were the ones that ensured that they were effectively managing, I will categorize as their remote infrastructure from a cybersecurity standpoint.
So, Paul, Derek, you guys have any, I always like to start security panels off with positivity because they always go negative so fast. You know, the world is ending and the red horde is coming over the horizon. Do you guys have anything to add around sort of some positive things you've seen? You're also an attorney, so you have to stay positive and talk about cybersecurity.
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to associate myself with exactly the line of thought that Missy advanced. I think that it makes a lot of sense to take a good look at how the companies that prioritize the needs of their employees and also recognize that not all employees are in the same place when they're prioritizing what the different postures are in terms of what is it that you need to do to make sure that somebody who has not been required to be a cybersecurity expert gets to a point where at the very least they're not a massive liability for your company when they're just doing the same thing that they've in many cases have been doing in the past. And I think that one of the ways that you can get there, if I were to put identify a silver lining, is that there are a lot of people who are becoming familiar with at least some basic elements of cybersecurity that they didn't know about before. I think this is, necessity being the mother of invention. I do think that people are resilient and that they are adapting to an extent, but we'd also be naive if we didn't realize that the expanding attack surface has resulted across numerous, just objective metrics in more attacks and more damage. If you just look at the past 2 years. So I think it's a balance of like seeing the positive, but also seeing the growing problem and thinking about what steps you can take to address it.
I'll just kind of chime in and kind of share some thoughts that I have. So fortunately for us, having run the technology team, when I came in 2011 at Boingo and became the CTO, one of the first things I had to do was try to decide, are we going to keep building out data centers? And I was like, I can't keep doing this. I got to try to think of a better way to do that. And so I said, okay, you know what, we're going to move to the cloud. And we were very quickly in moving to cloud. Like 2012, we started moving everything. By 2013, I think 90% of our stuff was running in the cloud. That changed the vector, right? It all of a sudden, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to create firewalls, and firewalls are what's important for my security, and I'm going to let people come in from home to the firewalls, and I'm going to worry about bring your own devices into the network. We made that change really quick, and we said, okay, we're going to end up getting into all these cloud environments, and I'm going to connect all of these networks that we support over 700 and stadiums, military bases all over the place. We're going to connect them all and manage them all through our NOC, but we're going to do it in a way that, that you're already outside of the office, because my field guys are in all of these different locations managing networks all over the world, and they need to have that security the same everywhere. And so we were fortunate enough that we were kind of ahead of the game. So then when we said, okay, well, let's go to the office, now everybody's going home. The challenge we're having now is everybody's at home. And I don't have the same network capabilities that I do when they go to all these other offices, or they're using the cloud and I know where those ins and outs are. Now they're at home. So now what we're doing is we're looking at those devices that they're using at home now and getting to all of our connections, and we're trying to secure those differently now and say, okay, we used to say everybody can use your own device at home and check your email or do whatever. Now we're saying, nope, just use your laptop that we give you, and we're securing that laptop because we can't control all the devices in somebody's home anymore.
Right.
And so that's really what's changed for us when we're thinking about it. Is we were lucky, we got ahead of it because of the other stuff, but now we're like, okay, now we need to rethink, because people are going to stay home now a lot more, and they're playing games and they're doing stuff probably that's going to let the viruses and all that stuff come through. Is okay, then the only thing we can really do is secure the devices now that they're using in our network. So we're kind of trying to establish different rules. So it's no longer bring your own device. It's like, how do you secure bring your own network?
Right. Yeah, you can't just lock down every device and perform investigations on people's home equipment and things like that. That's not going to happen, or at least not yet. All right, let's get into what we're really good at, talking about negative stuff in the security world. Paul, like, where do you think some areas need to, from what you've seen, like what's kind of like massive improvements and gaping holes out there that kind of need to be focused on still 2 years later?
So I think that there's both the expanding attack surface, there's the human element, and there's also just the technical element. I mean, the technical element is, as you just said, we're not going to suddenly start running inspections on everyone's devices. That would be incredibly intrusive. We can't really do that. But the flip side of that is that employers have a real visibility problem. Because while it's true, like what Hank said, that you can do a great ton of good if you were to, as an employer, say, okay, you're just going to use the laptop or the device that we gave you, and that we're going to have a VPN on it, we're going to run all of these security diagnostics, we're going to have some managed service provider, somebody looking at it. That's all well and good, and that's going to get you into a much, much better place than you were before, but it's not foolproof. If you bring an insecure device into your home, especially depending on how you use it and what its capabilities are, like, it could still introduce a vulnerability. And it's not like when you have like a government office, for example, and you have an inventory of like, here's all the, ideally, you have an inventory of everything that's connecting to your network. A lot of, not all businesses, but a lot of businesses, especially into cyber, who are focused on cyber hygiene, they'll do the same thing. Those sorts of steps just don't translate into the home environment. And I'm not sure how you get from where we are to where you would replicate that level of visibility without getting extremely intrusive, like you were saying. I'm not sure that we get there. So then the question is, what can we do in the absence, if you're never going to fully bridge that visibility gap, and we're headed towards this future where, it does seem for the foreseeable future, we are going to maintain, if not in some places a fully remote model, in other cases a hybrid model. If that's going to be, for many companies, the future, then the question is, what can you do to bridge that visibility gap? And I think part of what you need to do is look at the devices themselves, because right now you have many devices where the manufacturers are really focused on security, and that's something that they are advertising and working with the government, working with other stakeholders to try to make it clear that they're kind of on the right side of history. We all know that not everybody's a good actor in this space. If you go to a major retail store, there are products that were available in the past which got taken off the shelves because the manufacturers of those products ran afoul of certain government requirements, or they made misrepresentations. And I don't think, no matter how much you increase the level of knowledge of the average employee, I don't think everybody is going to, I don't think it's realistic to be able to put it on the consumer or on the employee to be able to make those kinds of differentiations. So I think there's an open policy question of how do you ensure that devices and the products coming into the home where people are working, how do you make sure that they're as secure as possible from the get-go?
Right. It's like about cyber hygiene. Basic cyber hygiene is most you can expect out of the average person.
Exactly.
And then on top, and you got to make it invisible and basically foolproof. So that's a good transition into what I was going to ask Derek about, which what can the reasonable average person do to kind of improve their cyber hygiene and create a less attackable surface for their employer and for themselves. Some of the little that I dabble in, like actual security operations these days, and I do more investing, a lot of the, sort of spectacular attacks that have happened over the last few years were threat actors targeting lower level employees, compromising them and moving laterally into the corporate network, or even an executive. Better yet, to attack an executive and then move into the network. So what can a reasonable and average person do?
I think Missy said it's a lot about education, and I think that's a key factor. We send out phishing scams, that end up training people all the time. I mean, we send them out pretty much every month that we send from our security group. And this last one, we sent one out because it was like the end of the year, and we said, hey, you need to go check your APD, to make sure that you're good and getting your W-2 back. And, I mean, it's not ADP, it's APD, so, that, a lot of these things do that. But I had a lot of the employees actually click on that, and then, of course, it says, oh, you clicked on something you shouldn't have, so, you need some remedial training. And
You ever clicked on your own?
I haven't yet, and I'm very careful, because I know the second I do.
I've clicked on my own.
I know the second I do, everybody's going to go, oh, he's the CISO, and he did it. So I have to be very careful. But I think that's training is key. And then the other thing, when we're working at a retail store, and we do a lot of retail stores as well, or we're working at, stadiums or whatever, one of the things that you're always having to look at is the threat itself, right? So it's the whole GRC. You got to have governance, risk, and compliance. And the risk is the key thing, is understanding your risks. And as you start adding, smart lights and smart washers and smart everything that we see here at CES, most people at home, and I stress this all the time, most people who are at home don't have their firewall looking to see, is the washer hitting my network, my router all the time? How much data is my washing machine trying to pass through? And so one of the things I try to tell people to do is always set up 2 networks when they're home, right? Set up one for all your other devices that you're trying to do, all your IoT devices, because they don't go through the rigor that computers and the other things go through. And so being able to hack one of those IoT devices, unfortunately, it's pretty easy. We need to fix that as an industry. And so trying to set up a separate network for that so that you can end up monitoring that IoT traffic, I think is important, separate from your other traffic. And then I think what we're going to get to is a point where we end up creating, because people are at home, you're going to end up creating these multiple networks. One of the things that we're doing in the education area is people are starting to work from home. And so I sit on the board of the Ongo Alliance, so CBRS, right, the LT, unlicensed and shared and all that. Education companies or education places are giving laptops that use a separate dongle that connect back through that secure CBRS network back into the education system, so that they have a different way of connecting. And that's becoming very popular in K through 12, and then also universities, is having these other networks that you can take and deploy, and cities are working on it. So tomorrow I'll be talking on the Smart Cities Initiative and security, and we'll be talking about some of these deployments that are happening with CBRS to kind of deal with some of these issues that are happening inside cities as well, to be able to secure, all the infrastructure and C to X that was on the conversation before our panel here.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, that wouldn't be an intrusive thing for a company to do, to maybe even support helping people set up a separate Wi-Fi network for other IoT devices, and just to, for their own personal security and for their corporate security, and that's an excellent.
Yeah, for our executives, myself included, we gave everybody basically a cradle point, so they have that at their service. When they're doing something that we know is more risky, we tell them to use the cradle point, which we secured ourselves and delivered to our executives.
It's shocking once you start adding devices how many you can quickly have. I mean, upwards of hundreds of devices in one house just doing various different things.
Definitely.
Well, and one thing I want to add to that too is, Derek, you brought up, we're at a conference that is all about adding devices to improve usability and user experience to our networks. That's the reality, and that's great, because in a lot of ways it's exciting, it makes our lives easier. But when you hear the term IoT, and that stands for Internet of Things, that is a very ambiguous description. And when you have ambiguity like that, think of the amount of vulnerabilities that Internet of Things, because of those interconnected devices, introduces to you at home, introduces to our companies, and it expands that attack surface substantially. So I think that balance is absolutely key, and we, and everyone in this room, which is great to see, has a security mindset. You're interested to learn more. But the reality is we do not, as consumers, set the standard yet for consumer product companies to bake in security and make sure that their security is up to a standard for us to buy their products. And that's where we need to move towards. We need to be the ones that drive and influence the industry to have security being a competitive advantage for these products. Otherwise, how are we going to shift this? It can't always be on us to make sure that we separate our Wi-Fi networks, and we make sure we have multi-factor authentication, and we make sure we have these insanely long and complex passwords that we're expected to memorize and then have to create another one, 3 weeks later. Like, that's insane. So how do we balance all of that, which is important, but also put it more and hold the consumer product creators accountable to make sure security is top of mind for them too. And I think it takes people in this room to make that shift and have that paradigm shift.
Yeah, it's been great. The presence of security topics at CES has been increasing over the years, and we used to be like in a backwater corner down the hallway, and we've made it down the hallway a bit. So, okay, so let's transition a bit into Missy with outside of just vulnerabilities. We've been kind of focused on vulnerabilities to threats. Booz Allen, I know, has a large sort of security consulting practice that focuses on threats, not just helping people solve their security problems, but like who the bad guys are, how they operate, how they conduct their tactics, techniques, and procedures, the latest trends. What are some of the trends that we're seeing as far as the threat out there, besides just vulnerabilities, which is terms that are sometimes used interchangeably, and they're two very different things. There's like a vulnerability, like we're talking about, and there's how bad guys are going to exploit them.
Yeah, exactly. Vulnerability, known, something that is a known weakness that can be exploited. A threat is something we can't control, but is all around us to cause danger. That's how I would bucket the two. The threat landscape, you will constantly hear the term is ever evolving, but what I will say is that the breaches that have occurred and caused the most damage over the last couple years have been threats that have been around for the last 10 years based on exploiting vulnerabilities that are basic and can be prevented in terms of just implementing cyber hygiene. So you'll hear that term a lot. Cyber hygiene is defined as just basic cybersecurity controls, like vulnerability scanning, having patching, routine patching, a risk management program, firewall rules updated and reviewed routinely, data protection controls, but that's basic cyber hygiene. And even though our digital ecosystem is evolving because we're adding in more technology, we're creating more innovation, and we're all more interconnected, the actual threat landscape is just continuing at the rate it has been. Last year, the average cost of a breach for a company is now at the highest it's ever been, and cybersecurity has been around for 20 plus years, and that is all based on very simple cyber hygiene and not doing that and not implementing that at the organizational level and also at the consumer level. So one of the things that I do see evolving because of this new way that we work is the fact that we are leveraging more collaboration applications and sites and interfaces in order to do our jobs. And when that happens, that's naturally going to introduce risk into your environment. And that's going to introduce risk in terms of vulnerabilities because you want to make sure that those applications are continuously assessed and patched accordingly to their criticality. So that's something that needs to remain to be a priority. But I would say that, in terms of threat actors, which are the bad people behind the threats and the attacks, those groups have been around for a while. You have groups that are sponsored, $9 billion sponsored nation-state groups that are just trying daily to take down the United States infrastructure, critical infrastructure, because of various motivators, economic advantage, stealing IP, whatever it may be. Then you have, which is kind of scary now, you have hacktivists that are not sophisticated anymore, because in the dark web, you can go and just purchase a kit that doesn't require too much sophistication in order to compromise a known vulnerability that is not patched in a certain system. That's somebody off the street that has some basic hacking knowledge, if you will, that can basically pick that up and do that. That is something that has not been around up until recently. And that just shows you we have the sophistication with the $9 billion sponsored nation state, and then we have the individual in their parents' basement bored and just want to see what they can do. So the range is there, and when that range is there, the controls have to be there. So it's extremely important to understand what risks and threats are most applicable to you, and how do you best protect against that.
Yeah, we're down to make sure we save some time for questions here at the end. I wanted to, Paul, quickly ask you if you have anything to comment on that. Is there anything any tech out there that's going to tilt the scales, in our favor potentially, or not just tech? Let's talk about policy and teams and maybe training or massive improvement of cyber hygiene. Like what could tilt the scales in the favor of the defenders versus the attackers moving forward?
So I think one thing that would be almost immediately actionable would be if we could get standards for IoT that are widely implemented. That would go a long way towards fixing a lot of the problems that we've been talking about. It's not, it's not a cure-all. It wouldn't fix absolutely everything. But, I mean, we've been talking for so long about IoT's expanding the attack surface. IoT is creating real risks for critical infrastructure, including the communications networks I represent. You have all of these situations where IoT, don't get me wrong, I love IoT. We all love IoT. That's why we're here. We love consumer technology. But at the same time, in the absence of some clear guidance to engineers, you have a lot of problems that arise. And then the question is, what are the incentive mechanisms for that guidance to actually be implemented? Because in many cases, the financial incentives do align with security. I'm an optimist in that regard. I do believe that that's the case. But there are certain instances where we could all point to where it doesn't. So I think, but the step one is to get everybody into agreement on what those standards are. So the organization I represent, US Telecom, has been working with CTA and 15 global companies. We hosted this massive convening of more than 20 of the top leaders in IoT. These are associations, these are standards bodies, these are organizations that came together in goodwill back in 2019 to kind of get on the same page. And the way we're looking at this is, what is the minimum? What is the baseline? It's like, you will not fall below this level. Now, normally when you hear attorneys talk, you'll get a lot of caveats. You'll say, well, maybe this, maybe that. I think in most cases, but here we're not being squishy. We actually, when we say a minimum or we say a baseline, we really do mean that in the absence of some mechanism by which industry can hold itself accountable, then you are, I think, running the risk of some real prescriptive and heavy-handed regulatory outcomes, which I personally think would not be, in the service of security long term. Now, then the question is, even if this is an international issue, it's not just the United States. IoT devices in other countries can ultimately impact infrastructure here in the U.S. So what we've been advocating for, and we've been in dialogues with the United Nations on this earlier this year, and we've also been working with nonprofits and other groups there to try to build and foster international collaboration. And we have already an ANSI standard, not to get too in the weeds, but this is a US standard. There's a European standard being developed, and right now at a standards development group called ISO-IEC, where two of the people on CSDE are directly involved in developing this standard. If we can get widespread international agreement, that's going to put us in a strong place then for building the expectations that these devices are going to come into your home already secure.
Widespread international agreement. Does that exist anymore?
We're trying very hard. We're trying extremely hard.
No, it sounds like you're doing yeoman's work, and that it's going to be important to solve this problem. This is a global problem. I mean, this is a global network of adversaries. Is a global. Same problems exist everywhere. So, Dr. Peterson, you've been in the technology arena for more than a minute. You're a technologist at the core. Can you give us some tips on how you quickly assess new technology that you're talking to me about going over to the stadium to evaluate some new technology here potentially in a few days, and then if you go to a cybersecurity conference, you walk around, everything kind of looks like the same thing. You're like, everyone looks like they're doing the same thing. How do you use a lens to quickly evaluate things?
I have two things I'll say real quick. I think that if I was to simplify it, I think it really boils down to identity and SASE or policy. Once you get identity solved, and we can do that, then it's policy and understanding a standard-based policy that goes with you everywhere. So I'd just say that's where we need to get to, is where we end up saying that the policy is my experience, so my internet of my experience. So I don't believe in internet of things. I believe in the internet of me, or IOME, the internet of my experience. And to be able to create that, we need to understand identity and then those things that are around us, in my experience that I'm connecting to, and what they're doing. And so to me, that's what 5G is doing, is we're saying, hey, it's not just a network anymore, it's what we're doing with the network. That's what matters anymore. And it's different than 4G, where we used to just say, oh, we're putting in a 4G network, it's going to be faster. Now we're saying, no, what are we doing with that network? And so that's what we're doing with third parties when we bring in new equipment, is we're saying, what is that equipment? What is that thing that's coming in, or that's going to be part of this whole experience, that you're going to come into a stadium and have ticketless travel and all these other great things that we're going to create, ordering beers from your seat with your phone or whatever. Or I got a chip in my hand. I know I brought it up before. I put an NFC in my chip in my hand like 7 years ago, and maybe I can order with that. But those kind of things that are going to happen, in those experiences that we're going to create, once we understand those experiences, we understand the identity behind those experiences, and then how we're going to have those identities work with together, and then we understand the policy for those two, then we can end up being able to create the experiences we want. And so it's really going first and understanding that, and then once you understand that, then you can build the policy and everything around that, so that you end up creating that experience in the appropriate way at that venue.
A secure experience, hopefully. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's real cybersecurity beyond the office. I mean, that's where we're doing work now, from the places your company builds networks. So that's excellent advice and an excellent lens in how that works. So we have a few minutes left, so I was going to open it up to the audience if there are any questions. It looks like there's a microphone there and a microphone there. Are there any questions, the audience? Yes, go ahead.
I write about cyber war in Forbes. I have a question about nation-state actors using ransomware particularly, and are there any strategies any of your enterprises have with respect to ransomware? And particularly, are we ready for a cyber war? Is the article I wrote in Forbes. I just want to ask the same.
Right. So ransomware, nation-state use of ransomware, and like best practices to kind of, how do you stop ransomware?
Yeah. This is good. No, great question. So I can provide some feedback.
All right, yeah.
So one of the things that we do at Booz Allen is anytime there's a massive ransomware event or there's a massive breach of any sort, our clients immediately come to us and want to understand, are we impacted? And if we're not impacted, what can we do to improve our security posture against a ransomware attack, similar in nature, similar in industry, whatever it may be. And so I will constantly go back to a few things. Defense in depth. And ransomware is something that can be addressed with defense in depth. If you think of how ransomware occurs, a lot of it is through targeting people, organizations, and consumers. Our world's biggest vulnerability, people, and phishing them, getting into the network that way. Okay, let's say someone got phished, they clicked on it, the attacker's in. Now what do? Well, if you had defense in depth, you would have monitoring in place to see them going through different networks, right? Okay, well, let's say we notice that they're actually going through the network and accessing different resources. So how would we stop that? Well, you make sure that that individual, that the credentials that they compromise, that they're in the network now, they don't have access to all these resources. So how do you implement security controls to ensure that an individual is only able to access things that they should be accessing? The whole concept of least privilege, right? Some of you, I'm sure, have heard the latest buzzword around zero trust, assume breach mentality, which is you keep everybody at least privilege and you really manage access down to that, so that if someone clicks on a phishing email, they get in. If they want to go through the network, they can't get to assets or access different assets anymore because they don't have the access to do so. And then you want to make sure that you have the continuous monitoring to detect throughout the network. So those are a few things, but to me, at a very macro level, it comes back to people and making sure that they do not click on things, and defense in depth.
40 minutes flew by. We're technically out of time. I guess we have, no one's told me to go off stage yet, so let's do another question.
Yeah, I'm glad she touched on a couple of things. I was going to ask you, I heard a lot about extending networks, right, to people, to places, et cetera. But you were just touching on, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on, how do you feel about the zero trust model, right? Instead of extending your network, I don't implicitly trust that device anymore. So it needs to authenticate several different ways before you can get access to anything. And then also around the behavioral analytics, right? And then protecting your trusted, your company's most prized possessions with those behavioral analytics, right? So you can kind of get those alerts before something bad happens, kind of what you touched on.
Anybody have anything to add to that?
No, I think you're right on it. I mean, that's what I try to said with the whole idea of identity and policy, is that once you understand the behavior of a light, you need to make sure that the light's behaving the way it's supposed to. And once you understand the behavior of a laptop and the behavior of an individual who's connecting to your network, and you know that he doesn't usually connect in at 2 in the morning, you do something appropriately. We have a lot that we can learn, from some of the behavioral analytics that are being done by the financial industry, which I know you guys work a lot on, and some of that I did my doctoral thesis on electronic payment efficacy quotients and all that kind of AI stuff going on there. And I think that, they've done a lot. And when you look and you say, okay, I'm driving, and all of a sudden a charge comes from a different location. Well, that's an indicator. And those same kind of indicators are available for all these devices that we're connecting to the network. We just have to take advantage of those indicators by looking and understanding the behavior of all these different things that are connecting.
Yeah, I guess what I would add to that is, zero trust is an important goal that a lot of organizations are, rapidly doing their best to move towards. But I think that there's a misconception that if you implement zero trust principles, that suddenly that's going to be the silver bullet that just cures ransomware, and that's not going to happen. So I think what we're going to need is to actually take a look at the coordination mechanisms for incident response within industry, and in some cases also with our government partners, in order to make sure that when something starts happening, because there are going to be bad days when bad things happen, so let's make sure that we can respond more quickly when that happens.
A quick one here. We saw here the IoT is a big concern globally, right? How do you see, IoT-based networks like Sigfox, LoRa, NB-IoT, do you see any improvements going forward on this type of networks? I'm a utility company, right? You have 1,000 of water meters, across Brazil, and I have a big concern about that.
Yeah. I'll take that. I deploy every type of network that there is. We always, when we go to a place, I'm deploying LoRa, NFC, you name it, whatever the venue that I'm supporting needs. And I've always said 5G is not about the cellular stuff that everybody talks about. I did a call to action back in 2014 saying that 5G is about collaboration and convergence of all networks. And so again, it goes back to even with your LoRa network, your NFC network, all those different networks, is a lot of people will say, I'm going to throw in a cellular network that I use for my cell phones, or I'm going to throw in a Wi-Fi network and I'm going to use it for everything. That, to me, is not the way you should be building networks. You don't want to be putting all your important stuff, your point of sale devices, on the same network that you have all your customer and your guests coming in using the Wi-Fi. That's what caused, one of the breaches we all know, and I won't name them, but you can think back a few years, and and we were part of that network at one point too. But the key thing is all of those networks are still networks, and so they still have identity and they still have policy that you got to put on them. But the nice thing is now we have shared spectrum, licensed spectrum, unlicensed spectrum in multiple different flavors, and we should be using them all instead of trying to mash every single device on one of those technologies. And so every venue I go to help out set up their new networks, whether it's cameras or whatever, the first question we say is, what else what are all the different things we're going to run on this network, and should we put in another network or on top of it? Now, that requires convergence, and that means that policy's got to go, because I'm going to be on cellular, and then I automatically going to switch over to Wi-Fi, and then I'm going to go back to CBRS, or I'm going to go back to a private network. If you don't have a policy that's individualized, and you're doing it per network, you're in trouble. So the policy, just like the identity, needs to go with the individual or that device.
A label for that too is micro-segmentation or segmentation. You know, from a security standpoint, if there would be a incident that's been detected, somebody that's basically going through the network, your network, if they were segmented off, you'd be able to stop it, right? And so really centralizing your critical assets into one segment and others, it's going to prevent it to basically take down your entire network and give that attacker the access that they would want to basically obtain.
These are great thoughts. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks for the amazing questions from the audience. Probably could have kept on for a couple of hours. There's some more security panels this week. I know you guys are on a few of them, so check those out. Missy, Paul, Dr. Peterson, thank you so much for participating. Thanks to Consumer Electronics Show for putting this on. Thank you.
Thank you.